Okay, you're all hungry, so I try to do it quickly. This is also about my failures in timing of surgery in traumatic spinal cord injury. These are my conflicts of interest. So with timing of surgery, we see a lot of problems in the past. And I told you just a joke that I made mistakes. The two worst mistakes in my life were that I was trained to operate upon herniated discs very early and spinal cord injury very late. And both of those things were not true. So the person who trained me asked me why I do this research. I said, well, I want to prove that what we are doing is wrong. So that means for degenerative spine disease, but also for brain injury, nerve trauma, brachial plexus injury, and also spine trauma. So the history is quite prolonged for spinal cord injury, probably one of the first diseases ever treated in the classic ages. And in the beginning, more than 100 years ago, Cushing reported the first outcomes with spinal cord injuries, where he said 80% will die, only the incomplete traumatic spinal cord injuries will survive. So and after that there came some surgical nihilism. People don't think that people recover after spinal cord injury. And then in 1987, Tater in Canada made the first publication that surgery might improve spinal cord injury, decompressive surgery. And after that, you all know him, Michael Velings, who promotes early surgery timing constantly. And we do the same from Europe. But still, although we have all those studies, a lot of people don't believe it, because traumatic spinal cord injury is giving a lot of issues. So when I look at Europe, our Europe population is smaller than the whole country of India. So I have to be very humble if I talk about spinal cord injury, because spinal cord injury is rising in our countries, but it is not the main issue like in your country. For instance, if I look at the world charts of the WHO, and you look at the incidence of spine trauma worldwide, a lot of our studies are done in North America and Europe. But if you look at the incidence of spine injury, that's much higher in your country. And that means that we can learn from you, and also probably that we have to learn from your data. The contrary is true for degenerative spine disease. So you see less degenerative spine disease than in North America and Europe. So are there real differences? Well, there are real differences in trauma incidence. The trauma incidence is much higher here, and also in the rest of Southern Asia and Africa and South America. But probably you also have degenerative spine diseases. And I put in the slide because I heard this morning about the amount of surgeons, neurosurgeons, for the amount of people, and I was shocked. And I looked at this chart, and I said, you have to be very busy in your country, because I'm already busy, but I'm at the green part of the chart, and you are at a very busy part. So you see a lot of spinal cord injuries. And why are we still not doing early surgery while we are trained in it? Well, advocates of the contrary say that the trauma patients with spinal cord injury is very ill, and that urgent surgery in the middle of the night can cause some problems if you don't have a good team. And that is true. The other thing is that some of the people I talk to who don't believe in it, well, I talk to them that they are lazy, but that's not a good joke. But even in my small center, we see spinal cord injuries, and every time I see a duty next morning, I ask, why did surgery take so long to time? Well, the anesthesiologist thought it was not urgent enough, but most of the times it is other urgent surgeries and not laziness. So sometimes these kinds of reconstructions are hazardous in the acute phase, but most of them are not big reconstructive spine surgeries. We have not to look only at the technique, but at the patient. What does it mean for a patient if he has a spine cord injury? It is catastrophic or extreme quality of life demanding. So this is my PhD student. She defended her PhD thesis last year about early surgery for timing. And she looked at the people, not at the surgery technique. There's nothing about the technique in her PhD, but she's looking at the people and the health of their life, doing sports, and then after that they don't are not able to walk anymore or move with their hands. So what do we know? There's a spinal cord compressed after trauma. We know that we can influence the prognosis of the patient. We can decompress. But is it clear that we should decompress? Valerie, my PhD student, she did an enquete in North America, Canada, the Canadian neurosurgeons, orthopedic surgeons, and in Europe. And what you did see is that if a patient comes in with an ASIA A, we as surgeons think you won't recover. So nearly 50% won't be operated urgently within 24 hours. And then you can say, is 24 hours urgent? And is there irreversible damage? Well, in the C-spine injuries, we see that there's more recovery than in thoracic spine injuries. So it's very important to know that in the C-spine injury, where we are all trained that it might not help to do urgent surgery, it might very much help because you see shifting from ASIA A to B, C, and D in the C-spine more than in the thoracic spine. So I advocate, and I also will say that this afternoon, that we should treat complete traumatic spinal cord injury as any other urgent surgery. So compare it to brain injury. Why is a brain injury more urgent than a spinal cord injury? An abdominal aneurysm, a rupture, or a gunshot wound. So we could say that if you look at the prospective cohort, and this was published by Dr. Moreau, he said, well, the C-spine injuries, they do recover. They have a tendency to recover. But the studies are not as prospective as we want to have it. So Valerie did a meta-analysis of all the studies with good quality have been performed, and there seems that there's early surgery in C-spine injury is helpful. So what did she do? We looked at two cities, Amsterdam and Utrecht, in which they didn't have the same efficacy. So in Amsterdam, they said, well, we do complete surgery after 24 hours, after 2-3 days, and Utrecht, everybody within 24 hours. Why did we from Leiden, The Hague, and Rotterdam didn't go with this study? Because within our group, we had dissensus. We didn't agree on it. So I was very much for early surgery, and my other colleagues were for delayed surgery. So if you do a kind of study like this, then you have to compare one center with one regiment to the other center with the other regiment. And what was shown is that early surgery showed more recovery within 24 hours. And there was no recovery in the group beyond 24 hours. And the recovery was quite enormous. Not a complete recovery, but for instance, you see that there are several levels of recovery in the early surgery group. And if you look at the recovery according to the patients, so not we as surgeons, then you see that if a recovery is small from B to C or from C to D, that is important for the patient. And we as surgeons say, well, if there is a recovery from C6 to C7 to a nerve root that you can move your hand, we say, well, we see a little bit movement, not a big recovery. We are sometimes even saying negatively to the patient. Well, is that true? The patient says, well, I can now write or I can drink, which was not able beforehand. So after the spinal cord injury and the treatment, you should also think about nerve and tendon transfers. So the conclusion after complete traumatic spinal cord injury, the recovery is nearly never complete. That's a wonder if it's complete. But there's, even with a local recovery, it gives a clinical benefit besides the mobilization. So there's a benefit. So again, Michael Velings, he showed it again. and he received a lot of criticism around the world because people don't believe that early surgery is more effective. There are more studies being done. Valerie already published that in her meta-analysis. So, do we talk about failure for our patient or success? We just had a beautiful hour about successes and failures. For a patient, every recovery or even the try to treat the patient is a failure with a success on the other side. So then about research, and I will say this afternoon too, it's very difficult because this is a very heterogeneous population. It's like comparing oranges to apples. So should we do an RCT? People said to me, well, we'll go you from the RCTs. Well, it's impossible because you have believers and non-believers, and you have no clinical equipoise in the group of treating physicians. So what we now start, and that will be done going for the next 4 or 5 years, in Belgium and Netherlands, we will have all those centers, those who do early surgery within 8 hours, and those after 8 hours or after 24 hours. Those results will be published in the near future, hopefully. In between, if the OR is empty, you are asleep, and a spinal cord injury comes, always think it might be your child, it might be yourself. Go for surgery, it's as urgent as brain trauma. So all for the added value for our patients and a clinical benefit. So I hope that if you didn't organize it yet, organize acute timing in your department. Thank you very much.
Dr. Madan is very senior neurosurgeon for arm process.
Thank you.
In India, sometimes, if we have spinal surgery, a spinal trauma in Delhi, the patient will come to you within 8 hours. But we receive patients quadriplegic after, say, 7 days, after 10 days. Then do you advise, and you see on MRI there is a compression, there is a contusion. Do you operate on these? And the power is 0. What is your opinion?
Well, I would, even if I would in your place where you have delayed surgery and there is compression, I still do the surgery. And the study we did in the Netherlands, those were the acute surgeries in which there was a complete unstable spine, but I also have to say we have a luxury situation. We don't see patients after a few days. But I would, if there's compression, I still would do that. And sometimes you see some recovery, but not in this study.
I'll just comment. We had a study for acute as well chronic cervical spinal cord injury, and acute cases normally we have taken within 24 hours, provided there is no spinal shock. There is spinal shock, they have to resuscitate, they have taken. If there is no spinal shock, such case we have taken within 24 hours. Our observation has been that when acute and complete paralysis, as he has said, most even within 24 hours, say 95% they have 1 or 2% probably assessment as when there is complete sensory and motor loss, such cases have not improved in a spinal cord, cervical spinal cord injury.
Yeah.
To that extent, we had a DRDO study, the Defense Research Organization study, where we have taken 2 stem cell therapy in because we have paraplegia center, where the chronic cases are settled for rehabilitation as well as occupational therapy. So there also, what we have found that we took 25 chronic cases and 25 acute cases. During surgery itself in the acute cases, and after some time the chronic case we have taken and we have done stem cell therapy. Type A or C, type A or this Asian grade A cases, they have not recovered. It was feasible, it was possible. So there are some centers in India still they are continuing with the stem cell therapy, but I do not know what the result. This was in the year probably 2006-07. Dr. Sasivadhan is here. If he is here, he can comment what is the result. He has followed them up.
Okay.
Any other question from the audience? Any other question? Very important
Yeah.
acute spinal cord
Yeah.
injury.
I think early surgery is very logical also, because if you look at 5 cases reported in literature of bilateral cervical facet dislocation, who were quadriplegic, who went on to have complete recovery, were reduced within 1 hour.
Yeah, that's true. So that's indeed the proof, and that is, and those are only a few case reports, but we all know that. you all see them in your department. So if you do it within 1 hour or 2 hours, you see the recovery.
One more question. Do you use steroids?
Yes. Yeah, that's the honest answer.
That is the joke. Everybody believes steroid is not useful, yet everybody in the world from north to south will give. Most likely, I think, from
Yeah.
north to south, everybody give. Because whatever it is worth, it's worth trying because you are not losing. Unless you give very, very high dose when the steroid complication.
No,
Any other question?
not the Brecken. That's true.
Sachin,
That is not the
Sachin,
Brecken
please.
protocol.
Please
It's
sit down,
not the
Sachin.
protocol.
Yeah, so
Sachin.
what's your opinion about operating on a traumatic central cord syndrome?
Yeah, that's part of this study too. So I'm a believer in that, but we also know that those patients can also spontaneously recover. But if I see a spinal stenosis and I don't wait on it, but part of the centers, so we have now 10 centers in Belgium and Netherlands, and half of them don't operate upon them urgently.
So that becomes the control for you, right?
Yeah, that's the control group, yeah.
Pankaj and yes.
How do you identify non-believer? What is non-believer?
Yeah, non-believer is,
What I could understand, I am also a non-believer.
yeah.
How?
How can I convince you? How can I convince you to be a believer?
What is the indirectly the question is, what is the evidence now? So what is the good quality evidence?
Yeah, and that's
Where is it seen?
that's completely true. The evidence is weak, so the evidence is still weak,
Last one.
and that's the reason why there are non-believers and believers.
Last question,
So that's, I think that is the
One more
important thing.
question.
So hopefully after the study, in 5 years, we have some answer, but
I think we are all believer and non-believer. Nobody is a non-believer. It's a proportion.
Sir, with the spinal shock, you wait for the spinal shock to wear off
No.
before you operate? Or you
I
go ahead?
operate.
The first thing is, does he
The-
believe
the-
sinus shock?
if the spinal shock is very severe and the patient, the anesthesiologist cannot stabilize the patient, then we don't do it.
No.
So that's exclusive.
My question, do you believe spinal shock? It's a hype. You believe in spinal
Yeah, I
shock?
believe in spinal shock. yeah.
Why?
It is there, sir.
But
But
if-
the anesthetic.
How long? How do you know?
But if the
Exactly, I don't know.
How do you know how long? How long? Patient is paraplegic when it is finished?
And if the anesthetist is not willing, then what do you do?
Then I convince the anesthesiologist, then I have a small debate, but sometimes it's too dangerous.
Last question. Interesting topic. More question, but we have to stop.
And what about the amount of cord injury on the outcome? Do you have taken this in consideration in your study? How much is the cord signal change?
Well,
Oh, you are asking MR changes. MR changes and recovery.
Correlation, yeah.
So in-
early
in-
surgery, let's suppose there is a there is no cord signal change and there is
Even stem
listhesis.
cell therapy.
You have gone early and you thought that it is due to this early surgery. And suppose there is a lot of cord signal change, dislocation is more, patient doesn't recover. So what impact has these things on your study?
Yeah, well, in the old study, at that time, at the MRI, a cord signal change on the MRI was seen as definite myelopathy by the trauma. Now we know that the MRIs show that there are also myelopathies that change in the way of time after they have been decompressed. So in this study we published, we didn't look at MRI images, the different images. In this prospective study, we will do standardized MRIs at day one, after the trauma, and then after surgery, 48 hours after surgery, do an MRI, and then after several months. So that's part of the protocol.
Last question, yes.
Well, yeah, for the high C-spine injuries, if I understand you well, above C4, then I lose my nihilism. We do everything we can, unless the anesthesiologist is not able to stabilize the patient. But very frequently, in those patients, in high C-spine injury, we do all we can, but we have different legal issue in our country compared to your country, what I heard this morning. So we can do everything in the first 48 hours, and if a patient doesn't recover, then we stop treatment, we withdraw treatment, which is not possible here.
I have one question from the audience. Do you believe in stem cell therapy and you think it has a future? stem cell therapy in total spinal cord injury or partial spinal cord injury?
Well, for as it is now, I don't believe that there is
Any
good
role?
evidence.
No, today there is no role. Can you hear?
Yeah, yes.
No role.
But in the future, because the stem cell therapy works in the heart, it even works partially.
Because see, these things are continuously disturbing people. Steroid, stem cell. Steroid, stem cell.
Yeah.
No stem cell.
No stem cell. So now I know how you
No,
did
but
lead
that
the
is not the last
department.
word anyway. He has given his own opinion. He has given his opinion. Okay, if there is no question, we'll stop. Close.
I think the future will sort
Actually,
out stem cell
spinal cord
therapy.
injury is such a vast topic. It cannot be covered in 15 minutes.
Okay, thank
But
you.
we had a good discussion.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Give him a big hand. Next lecture. Next. Make it interesting. Okay, who is next? Dr. Yogi. No? You're not. Who is next?
Thank you, Dr. Wilco, for the excellent lecture. Our next lecture will be on Do Healers Need Healing Too? An insight from a neurosurgeon by Dr. Mahesh Karandikar.
Yeah. Good afternoon, everybody. Let me start with a small story. A person goes to a doctor and tells the doctor that I am feeling completely disinterested and depressed. Please examine me and give me some tablets. So the doctor thoroughly examines and says that you have nothing wrong medically. What I would recommend is, the famous clown Pugliese is in town. You go and just watch his show tonight and you will be all right tomorrow. The person gets up and sadly says that, doctor, I am Pugliese. So the point is, if this sad clown paradox is a known entity, and if we extrapolate this to our own scenario, our neurotrauma team, who is always thinking in terms of recovery of the patient, reducing morbidities and mortalities, in casualty, operation theaters, wards, everywhere, are there any invisible injuries to us? Do we have consequent morbidities? And does it lead to slow progress of death? Is it that serious? So the first thing is, if we get convinced that the healers need healing, then the next part is, what should we do for that healing process? See, when we are working as a neurotrauma team member, we keep stimulating our brain on so many fronts. We are indulging into patient care, we need to communicate with the relatives, we have issues to get things done from our team members. Litigation is a very serious issue these days. We need to concentrate on every single thing. There are behavioral problems, psychological problems, emotional problems, administrative issues. Family and relationship is a key thing which we always miss as busy neurosurgeons. And last but not the least, finance also we need to look into. There are many publications in last couple of years which talk about burnout amongst not only neurosurgical training, but also in established neurosurgeons. This landmark paper in surgical neurology and another paper in Journal of Neurosurgery talk about the serious incidence of burnout syndrome as high as 51.1% in neurosurgeons and 45.4% in neurosurgical trainings. And this is a meta-analysis of 16,000 odd studies. The main components being emotional exhaustion, depersonalization, and reduced personal accomplishment. The feeling of reduced personal accomplishment again leads to more burnout, and you end up into a positive feedback vicious cycle with serious consequences. If this is allowed to continue, then that also affects life expectancy. And to the best of everybody's surprise, if you have a look at this study which talks about suicidal rates amongst 1,000+ people, the topmost in the list is anesthetists, surgeons, and emergency medicine people. I mean, most of the neurotrauma team members. Let's try to understand what exactly goes wrong. The physiological stability at subcellular level essentially consists of healthy communication between intracellular organelles, intracellular communication within tissues, within organs, and even intra-organ communication. Now, when you have stressful situations, this stability goes, and the destabilized system is to be again made stable by some metabolic recalibration. and this obviously needs some kind of extra energy expenditure. Now, if this keeps happening again and again, this is called as allostasis. If this keeps happening every single day and you land up into a chronic process, then the destabilization cannot be brought back to complete stability in spite of expenditure of more amount of energy as shown in the red zone. If still it is allowed to progress, then there is something called as allostatic overload or the toxic stress level, which leads to disruption of the system and initiation of the disease process. Now, from where does this extra energy comes? This extra energy comes from stealing the energy which otherwise could have been utilized for cell repair. And the consequences: telomere attrition, cellular aging, and the cascade follows. And mind you, this has directly been shown to be proportionate to the multitasking which all of us keep doing all the time, talking on the phone, looking at paper, something. Initially, it has been shown that there is metabolic derailment, and it can be seen even in the form of microscopic changes like dendritic atrophy, more seen in prefrontal cortex and limbic system. The metabolic derailment leads to increase in the levels of circulating cytokines and inflammatory leukocytes, leading to this chronic inflammatory non-specific syndromes with thrombolysis, malignancy, and autoimmune complex. What are clinical manifestations if the system maladapts? The clinical manifestations is irritable behavior, serotonin-related mood disturbances, irritable bowel syndrome, multitasking, and that consequently leads to, all non-communicable disease, diabetes, hypertension, IHD, rheumatism, young strokes, and so on. This another landmark paper talks about, the role of glucocorticoids. Stress-related glucocorticoid release in early stage is extremely important, but if the glucocorticoid level crosses a particular threshold, then there is huge load of free radical generation because of insulin signal abnormalities, which have been shown by this paper from Bruce McKibben, and that leads to amyloid beta toxicity with dementia. Even if it doesn't lead to dementia, there is surely behavioral abnormality which is consequent to this. As we know, our brain is evolved from reptilian brain to limbic brain, from limbic brain to neocortical brain. When allostatic overload occurs, then we go down from neocortical to limbic and limbic to reptilian brain with consequent problems on the front of cognition. The cognition goes from concrete cognition to irrational cognition. Emotions change from joyous to terrified. Behavior changes from optimal healthy behavior to destructive behavior. Unnecessarily irritability, may it be with your colleagues, may it be with your assistants, may it be with your superiors, and so on. So now the question is, what do we do to manage the allostatic overload? Most important is, see, this is again a very big topic, and I had to just flash few important points in a 15-minute span which is given to me. The first and important thing which we need to look into is, what can we really do? The first step is to know thyself, know the brain. You should think over as to where we began, right from our residency days. We keep running around, and then you decide as to what do you want to achieve and what have you achieved. If an insight is developed into what really mattered a lot to you when, at that time, and what matters to you now, then you can have a balanced approach to what matters the most in life. And then you will be prepared to change your lifestyle, at least to start making changes in the lifestyle. Because many a times you look at it as a hopeless situation, but always realize that a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. And as has been described in details by James Clear in this book, Atomic Habits, even if you change 1% a day, that can make you 37 times better in 1 year. So the initial step of changing your lifestyle is most important. Now we'll quickly see what all the areas essential in changing. The diet which you eat, the quantity which you eat, the timing when you eat your food, how it is prepared, what is the content. As it is said, yatho annam tatho mana. More important than pre and probiotics now are the days of thinking about psychobiotics, because the brain governs the gut and the gut has consequent effects on your thinking. A lot again can be said on this, but those who are interested can read this mind-gut connection and second brain. Another important area is regular exercise. One needs to question oneself, how much exercise do all of us do every day? Again, resistance exercises and endurance exercises have lots of differential effects on various body systems. But the key is tryptophan oxidation is optimized. And if tryptophan oxidation is not optimized, then the consequent result is clinical manifestations of behavioral problems, psychological problems, emotional issues and things like that. Optimizing the dopamine-serotonin balance is also most important for healthy brain. This book which was just published last year, Dopamine Nation, by Dr. Anna Lemke, professor from Stanford, she says that hedonism, the pursuit of pleasure, see why basically everything is done. Everything is done in pursuit of pleasure. May it be number of surgeries, may it be more amount of money, more amount of publication, organizing conferences, attending conferences, having bigger houses and so on and so forth. This hedonism itself leads to anhedonia. You stop getting interest in the same achievement. So you aim at something different and the cycle continues one after the other. Any desire makes you act in a particular way. You achieve something that yields some possessions, but then those possessions don't make you adequately happy. So you land into greed. Now, if the greed components of not fulfilled adequately, then that leads to anger. Again, disrupted behavior, impairment in your performance, and then you're not able to achieve what you could have achieved even otherwise. So what we need to remember is, as long as greed is stronger than compassion, there will always be suffering. Our own Upanishads have given roadmap, and these are the days of protocols, you know. So Brihadaranyaka Upanishad gives a detailed protocol of controlling greed. In short, it says that if you keep adding oil to a fire, then the holy fire becomes dahat agni, and that can, you know, burn the hand which is pouring oil into the fire. To develop this insight, all of us need to spend at least some time alone to be with your own self. Many people feel that they go to Vipassana or something and they start finding themselves very lonely and come back. But if you are lonely when you are alone, then you are in bad company, as said by Jean-Paul Sartre. So you need to question your own ability to look at your own self. Another sweet Upanishad, Taittiriya Upanishad, has got three components: Shikshavalli, Anandvalli and Bhruguvalli. And this Anandavalli describes in depth about the real joy within. You try to search for joy in the possessions which you have, but the real joy lies within. And if you learn this, then you become independent of the material possessions and your inner journey begins. Most of we neurosurgeons or neurotrauma team members tend to utilize maximally the left half of brain, and there is an entity called hemispheric dichotomy, the imbalance between the functioning of two hemispheres. Therefore, even if not possible every day, at least some time we should be able to, you know, spend doing painting or developing your hobbies or singing, being near nature. Otherwise, a lot again can be discussed about hemispheric dichotomy and the consequences. Yoga, Ashtanga Yoga in particular, is one very, very important platform which you can develop for gaining stability. Ashtanga Yoga is not straightway meditation. It is having 8 components. Yama, Niyama, Asana, Pranayam are the foundational Bahir Yoga. And then Dharana, Pratyahar, Dhyan and Samadhi are the Antar Yoga, the next 4 components. We, as neurosurgeons, should focus on unification of this Dhyaya, Dhata and Dhyana triad. When we are concentrating on a particular subject, this concentration, if it gets unified, there are 3 components, you know. There is an object to concentrate, like the brain on which you are operating upon, the subject, that is yourself, and the distractions which keep coming. If you can win over the distractions and have complete unification, then you have extraordinary degree of concentration, and then neurosurgical operation itself becomes a real meditation. As illustrated in Mahabharata, Arjuna could win Draupadi simply because he could achieve this Sanyama as described in Vibhutipada of Patanjali Yoga Sutra, to hit the eye of the fish. There are many electrophysiological studies and functional MRI studies published in last couple of years which talk about limbic deactivation after chanting Om. Just 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 minutes of Omkar chanting. Our own Mundakopanishad gives a detailed account of various types of Omkar chanting and what are the differential advantages of each. Mundakopanishad could itself be a big topic of discussion. Lot of work is being done all over the world. Professor Andre from France, Daniel Monti from California have developed lots of techniques, to study and correlate these kind of things. There has recently been a study published in Rome, Italy, which talks about, the specific positive outcome in healthcare providers when they continue yoga for a period of 6 to 12 weeks. And if they continue, then lots of morbidity is avoided. More than 100 years ago, way back in 1889, the idea of equanimitas was introduced by Professor William Osler during his farewell address to Pennsylvania. Later, when he went to Yale, he wrote a book, A Way of Life, published in 1913. I'll summarize this now in next 2-3 minutes. We have our own inspiration lighthouses like Dr. Tandon, who could achieve so much on various walks of life. So to summarize, I think now RRR is winning Oscars, so we should have our own RRR. That is, reassess yourself where you are, where you want to reach, and how you can realign yourself to recover from the situation where you are. What you need to change is you need to change yourself. If you need to change your outlook to look at the world, then the world around you would be seen differently. Like, everybody sees sunrise, but a small child feels that the sun rises on east and then travels to the west. If the child grows and matures enough, then he starts realizing that earth moves and sun is stationary. If your knowledge still grows, then you realize that both earth and sun move, and later you come to a conclusion that the whole galaxies move. So it is your outlook which decides the perspective. The world around you remains same, sunrise is going to remain same. Again, a foundational Upanishad, Ishavasya Upanishad, talks in detail about how to change your outlook from within. And if you can have this perspective within yourself, you can spread this perspective to your family, your neurotrauma team, and then you can achieve a 360-degree health, physical, mental, psychological, philosophical, spiritual. And if everybody has this kind of health, then probably the world would be a better place to live, and global health could really be possible. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Lancet 1975 say doctors have average life lower than the average man. And then average man has got a lower life than a laborer in the village who doesn't have ambition. So if you have to have an intention, ambition, failure and success, you are going to have tremendous stress. So if you do not know how to manage stress, cut down your ambition. Any question? Cut down your ambition. Don't become over ambitious and stress and then cut down your life.
See, I feel there has to be an ambition to progress, sir.
That's okay.
But
that's okay. Over ambitious.
Yes.
Over ambitious. Know your stability. Know your over predictions one's own capability. That is frustration between achievement and expectation.
True, sir.
This is told what is frustration. Your expectation is this much. You are expecting this much. I think that's wonderful. Any question? Sir, I think he is most experienced person.
I think the one thing everyone should realize, that you should maintain peace at home, then peace everywhere.
Very true, sir. Very true.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
No question. We'll end this. Then we'll go to next session. Sir, Dr. Saab, or Professor,
Professor,
launch
best interest of time, we now break for lunch. We shall regather at 2:15 and start with Dr. Padma's lecture. Sir, the lectures have been rescheduled, sir, after lunch.
I was thinking that we will finish and
We regather at 2:15 and start with